eaten by a leopard after going off trail. But first, let's start with our first story. September 2nd, 2015 began like any other day of adventure for the Kingsley family. Laura Kingsley, a 39-year-old primary school teacher from Melbourne, had always been the practical one in her marriage. With her methodical approach to lesson planning and her natural instinct to care for others, she had organized every detail of their overland safari adventure through South Africa. The mother of 2 teenagers had spent months researching their route, reading travel forums, and preparing emergency kits. Her colleagues at Riverside Primary School knew her as someone who never left anything to chance. Her students adored her gentle but firm teaching style, and parents trusted her completely during school camping excursions. By the time they reached Kruger's gates, the sun was already painting the horizon in shades of orange and red. The main rest camps were fully booked, forcing them to accept accommodation at Lower Sabi, one of the smaller camps situated directly on the banks of the Sabi River. The camp's proximity to water meant increased wildlife activity, something the booking agent had mentioned but Laura had dismissed. After dinner, Laura gathered the dirty dishes and utensils to wash them at the communal washing. The washing area was located close to the perimeter fence, where the sound of the river was strongest. The washing facility was positioned unfortunately close to a section of fence that had been damaged earlier that day by a fallen tree branch. Camp maintenance had cordoned off the area but hadn't yet completed repairs, leaving a gap just large enough for a determined predator to exploit. Laura, focused on her task, failed to notice the warning tape that had partially fallen away from the damaged fence section. As Laura bent over the washing basin with her back to the river, the damaged fence section erupted in an explosion of water, mud, and scales. A massive Nile crocodile, over 14 feet long and weighing nearly 1,000 pounds, had been lying motionless in the shallow for hours, drawn by the scent of food waste and the regular human activity near the water's edge. The crocodile's initial strike was a masterpiece of predatory precision. Its massive jaws, capable of exerting over 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, clamped down on Laura's torso with bone-crushing force. Her scream pierced the night air and sent every animal within a mile radius into panicked silence. Laura's husband heard the scream and the distinctive splash of something massive entering the water. He ran toward the washing facility. What he found was a scene from a nightmare. Overturned washing basins, Laura's sandals scattered across wet concrete, and a trail of disturbed mud leading directly to the gap in the fence. The crocodile had executed its attack. After the initial bite, it had immediately begun dragging Laura toward deeper water, using its powerful tail and legs to propel both predator and victim through the gap in the fence. Other campers, alerted by the husband's desperate screams for help, arrived to find him standing waist-deep in the water, frantically sweeping with his flashlight beam. The river had returned to its deceptive calm, showing no sign of the violence that had just occurred beneath its surface. Camp security arrived within minutes, but their powerful spotlights revealed only disturbed sediment and the occasional bubble rising from the depths where the crocodile had taken its victim. The search and rescue operation that followed was one of the most extensive in Kruger history. Professional divers, despite the extreme danger posed by other crocodiles in the area, spent 3 days exploring the underwater caves and fallen trees where Nile crocodiles typically cache their prey. The river's murky water and strong current made the search nearly impossible, with visibility limited to mere inches, even with underwater lighting equipment. Laura's body was finally recovered 4 days later, nearly 6 miles downstream, caught in a tangle of fallen trees where the current had deposited it. The condition of her remains told the story of her final moments. The tragedy led to immediate and comprehensive changes throughout Kruger's camp system. The damaged fence at Lower Sabi was replaced with a double barrier system, motion sensor lighting was installed in all washing facilities, and new protocols require camp maintenance to immediately repair any fence damage regardless of the hour. Laura's family returned to Australia forever changed. But as the sun rose over the Sabi River, washing away the last traces of that terrible night, another predator was already stalking its next victim in the vast wilderness of Kruger. April 4th, 2017 found Abel Fenn exactly where he belonged, behind the wheel of a safari vehicle with the African bush stretching endlessly in every direction. At 34, Abel had spent nearly half his life in Kruger National Park, first as a junior ranger, and then as one of the most respected safari guides in the region. Born in a small town near the park's border, Abel's childhood was filled with adventures in the bush, learning to track animals and read the subtle signs that most people missed. Abel's colleagues described him as methodical and safety-conscious, someone who never took unnecessary risks despite his deep familiarity with the park. But Abel had one weakness that his friends and family had noticed over the years. When he was focused on solving a problem, he could become almost obsessively determined, sometimes pushing the boundaries of safety protocols in his pursuit of perfection. That afternoon, Abel had completed what he considered one of his best game drives ever with a family from Germany. As they returned to the lodge, Abel realized he had dropped his expensive GPS unit somewhere along the network of bush roads they had explored. Despite the approaching darkness and strict company policy against solo bushwalks, Abel decided to retrieve the GPS before it could be damaged by overnight dew or discovered by other guides. What Abel didn't know was that the Lion Coalition had split up after the tourists left. While most of the pride remained at the waterhole, the dominant male, a battle-scarred veteran known to researchers as Mapogo 4, had begun patrolling his territory boundaries. This massive lion was in the prime of his aggressive phase, having recently taken over this section of territory from a rival coalition. The operations manager, concerned about the late hour, advised Abel to wait until morning, but Abel assured him that he would be back within the hour. Those would be the last words anyone would hear from him. Mapogo 4 had detected Abel's scent from over 300 yards away and had been stalking him for nearly 10 minutes. Male lions are ambush predators despite their size, capable of moving with surprising silence when hunting. The assault came without warning as Abel bent to examine what he thought might be his GPS. Mapogo 4 launched himself from the shadows with the explosive power that makes lions Africa's apex predators. His 420-pound frame struck Abel with the force of a small car, the impact alone sufficient to break ribs and drive the air from his lungs. Abel's rifle, a .375 caliber weapon capable of stopping any African game, remained slung across his shoulder, useless in the face of such a sudden and overwhelming attack. The lion's initial bite targeted Abel's neck and shoulder, massive canine teeth designed for killing large prey, penetrating deep into vital areas. Abel's scream was cut short as the lion's jaws compressed his throat, but his body continued to fight with the desperate strength that adrenaline provides. He managed to strike the lion's face several times, his fist connecting with the predator's sensitive nose and eyes. But the blows only seemed to enrage the massive cat further. Lions kill large prey through suffocation, using their powerful jaws to crush the windpipe while their body weight pins the victim to the ground. The killing process took nearly 8 minutes, an eternity of terror and pain as Abel's body shut down system by system. Once Abel's movement ceased completely, Mapogo 4 began the process of claiming his kill. Unlike the feeding behavior of lionesses, who typically begin eating immediately, territorial males often drag their prey to a secure location before feeding. The search for Abel began when he failed to return to the lodge by his estimated time. His abandoned vehicle was located quickly, but finding his body in the vast wilderness required the expertise of professional trackers and the use of helicopter spotlights. The search team followed the lion's drag marks for over 200 yards before discovering Abel's remains in a dense thicket, partially consumed in the pattern typical of male lion feeding behavior. Mapogo 4 was not hunted or destroyed, as wildlife officials determined that the lion had been acting within normal territorial behavior when confronted by a human in his domain. The incident marked the first fatal lion attack on a professional guide in the greater Kruger area in over a decade, sending shockwaves through the safari industry and leading to stricter enforcement of solo operation policies. But as the investigation into Abel's death continued, another tragedy was already unfolding, where a different kind of predator was about to demonstrate how terrifying pack hunters can be. June 19, 2013 began before sunrise for Sifo Malangu, just as it had every morning for the past 3 years. At 27, Sifo was known throughout the Thorny Bush Private Game Reserve as the most reliable member of their kitchen staff. Sifo had grown up in a rural village outside the reserve, where his grandmother had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. She had instilled in him a strong work ethic and a deep respect for the natural world that surrounded their community. The young man had started as a dishwasher but quickly impressed management with his dedication and attention to detail. His supervisors praised his punctuality and thoroughness. Sifo's morning routine was as predictable as clockwork. He would arrive at the staff gate, unlock the kitchen facilities, and begin preparing for the breakfast service that would start in 3 hours. His first task was always disposing of the previous day's food waste at the compost area located about 100 yards from the main lodge building, beyond the staff quarters but still within the reserve's outer fence. Very easy work for Sifo. But this particular week had been different. The lodge had hosted a special traditional braai for a group of wealthy international guests, featuring large quantities of grilled game meat including kuda, impala, and warthog. What Sifo didn't know was that the unusually large amount of meat waste had attracted a clan of spotted hyenas, who had been systematically testing the reserve's perimeter fencing for weaknesses. Spotted hyenas are among Africa's most intelligent and adaptable predators, with social structures more complex than those of most primates. The clan that had discovered the lodge's waste disposal area consisted of 6 adults led by a dominant matriarch whose aggressive nature and problem-solving abilities had made her the most successful hunter in the region. For 3 consecutive nights, the hyenas have been probing the fence line, searching for gaps or weaknesses that would allow access to the rich food source they could smell but not reach. On the 3rd night, they discovered that recent heavy rains had washed away soil beneath a section of fencing near the compost area, creating a gap just large enough for them to squeeze through. As Sifo made his way across the compound in the pre-dawn darkness, he followed his usual path, carrying 2 large containers of kitchen waste. The route took him past staff quarters and along a service road that led to the compost area. Unbeknownst to Sifo, 3 hyenas had been feeding at the compost site for most of the night, gorging themselves on the rich meat scraps that represented more protein than they would normally consume in a week. However, instead of retreating when they detected Sifo's approach, their feeding frenzy and territorial instincts over the valuable food source overrode their natural caution around humans. The matriarch, emboldened by successful nights of scavenging and protective of her clan's newfound bounty, made the decision to defend their prize. The attack began the moment Sifo stepped into the poorly lit compost area. The matriarch struck first, her powerful jaws clamping down on his left leg just above the ankle. The bone-crushing bite immediately severing his Achilles tendon and sending him crashing to the ground. His scream of agony and terror echoed across the compound, but the thick walls of the lodge buildings in the early hour meant that his desperate cries went unheard by the sleeping staff and guests. The other 2 hyenas joined the assault within seconds, their pack-hunting instincts taking over as they surrounded their fallen victim. Sifo fought with the desperate strength that only mortal terror can provide, using his remaining good arm to strike at the hyena's sensitive noses and eyes. The 3rd hyena, smaller but no less vicious, began tearing at his torso, its teeth designed for cutting through tough hide, easily penetrating his work clothes and the flesh beneath. The feeding began while Sifo was still conscious and fighting. Hyenas are not patient killers like lions or leopards. They begin consuming their prey as soon as it's sufficiently disabled to prevent escape. The attack continued for nearly 20 minutes, an eternity of agony as Sifo's body was methodically consumed by 3 predators. And gradually, Sifo took his last breath. The lodge's head of security discovered that something was wrong when Sifo failed to turn on the kitchen lights at his usual time. A search of the compound led to the horrific discovery at the compost area, where the scene defied description. The 3 hyenas had dragged what remained of Sifo's body into the bush beyond the fence, following their instinct to feed away from potential threats or competition. Only scattered clothing and massive amounts of blood remained to tell the story of the brutal attack. The investigation that followed revealed the fence breach and the systematic way the hyenas had exploited the weakness in the lodge's security perimeter. The entire clan was eventually tracked and relocated to a distant part of the reserve, though the 3 individuals responsible for the attack had to be destroyed due to their demonstrated willingness to target humans. Sifo's family received substantial compensation from the lodge. His grandmother, devastated by the loss of her beloved grandson, lost the person she cared for and loved the most. While Sifo's life was cut short, another victim has been claimed in another location. A moment where even with vast knowledge, no one can be saved from catastrophic consequences. March 28, 2018 dawned with the kind of crisp clarity that made Daryl Monroe grateful for his career choice. At 31, the veterinary technician had spent the last 5 years working at the Limpopo Primate Research Institute, a specialized facility located in the Waterberg region, about 200 kilometers from Kruger National Park. Daryl had originally planned to become a traditional veterinarian, but his fascination with primate intelligence had led him down a different path. His gentle demeanor and infinite patience made him particularly effective at working with traumatized or aggressive animals, earning him recognition throughout South Africa's conservation community. The facility housed 18 chimpanzees, most of them rescued from illegal pet trade operations, retired from entertainment industries, or confiscated from private collectors. Among the facility's residents was Kibo, a 12-year-old male chimpanzee who had arrived 3 years earlier after being confiscated from a private collector in Johannesburg. Kibo had initially bonded strongly with his younger sibling, another rescued chimp named Django. The two had been inseparable, grooming each other, sharing food, and providing mutual comfort as they adjusted to their new surroundings. But 6 months before the incident, Django had died suddenly from a congenital heart defect that had gone undetected during his initial medical examination. Kibo's reaction to his sibling's death had been profound and troubling. Kibo became withdrawn and aggressive, refusing to interact with the other chimps and showing signs of severe depression that concerned the entire research team. He had begun displaying abnormal behaviors, including self-harm, food refusal, and increasingly violent outbursts towards staff members. Daryl had worked tirelessly to help Kibo through his grief, implementing specialized therapy protocols and spending extra time with the traumatized animal. However, Kibo's behavior remained unpredictable and increasingly dangerous. The facility had been undergoing renovations to expand the outdoor enclosures, providing the chimps with more natural living spaces and better enrichment opportunities. The construction work required temporary modifications to several habitats, including Kibo's. The disruption to their routine had increased stress levels throughout the facility. On that fateful morning, Daryl arrived at the facility to discover that one of the new electronic locks on Kibo's temporary enclosure had malfunctioned during the night. The sophisticated system, designed to be completely escape-proof, had apparently been systematically manipulated by Kibo's superior intelligence. Security cameras showed that the escape had occurred around 2 a.m., giving the 160-pound chimpanzee over 6 hours to explore the facility and potentially breach the outer perimeter. Adult male chimpanzees possess strength approximately 7 times greater than humans. In the wild, they are capable of extreme violence, particularly when defending territory, establishing dominance, or responding to perceived threats. Kibo's psychological state, combined with his grief, the stress of construction, and his newfound freedom, had created a potentially explosive situation that required immediate professional intervention. Rather than immediately activating the facility's emergency protocols or requesting tranquilizer backup, Daryl decided to attempt a gentle recovery using behavioral techniques that had worked with Kibo in the past. He gathered some of the chimp's favorite foods, including specially prepared fruit treats and honey-coated nuts, and began following the trail of disturbed vegetation and damaged equipment that marked Kibo's path through the facility grounds. Daryl found Kibo approximately 300 yards from the facility, sitting in a grove of wild fig trees near the outer fence line. The chimp appeared highly agitated, his hair standing on end in the threat display typical of stressed chimpanzees. For nearly 40 minutes, Daryl worked patiently to establish communication, but Kibo's psychological state had deteriorated far beyond what Daryl realized. At this moment, Kibo launched himself from the tree with the explosive power that makes chimpanzees such formidable predators in the wild. His first strike caught Daryl completely off guard, powerful hands grabbing his head and shoulders, while massive canine teeth over an inch long targeted his face and neck in the pattern typical of chimpanzee aggression. The initial bite tore away most of Daryl's left cheek and shattered his jaw, the sound of breaking bone audible even over his screams of agony. Kibo's assault followed the classic pattern, first disabling the victim's ability to fight back by targeting the hands and arms, then focusing on the face and genitals to inflict maximum psychological and physical trauma. Daryl's right hand was nearly severed at the wrist by Kibo's powerful bite, the bones crushed beyond any hope of surgical repair. The attack continued for nearly 8 minutes. Daryl's screams echoed through the facility, alerting the security team, but by the time they arrived with tranquilizer equipment, the damage was already catastrophic. Daryl's features were rendered unrecognizable. The facility's medical team worked frantically to stabilize his condition, but the massive trauma to his head and neck, combined with severe blood loss, proved insurmountable. Emergency medical personnel arrived within 12 minutes of the attack, but Daryl died en route to the hospital, his dedication to animal welfare ultimately costing him his life. The search for Kibo continued for 22 hours, with teams of rangers, veterinarians, and animal control officers combing the surrounding wilderness. The chimpanzee was eventually located in a dense thicket about 2 kilometers from the facility, displaying continued aggressive behavior and showing no recognition of his former caretakers. Despite multiple attempts to tranquilize him safely, Kibo had to be euthanized when he charged the capture team, his psychological breakdown having progressed beyond any hope of rehabilitation. The facility was immediately shut down pending a comprehensive investigation by both provincial authorities and international primate welfare organizations. The incident led to sweeping changes in protocols for handling psychologically damaged primates, including mandatory backup procedures for any escape situations and stricter guidelines for staff interaction with traumatized animals. As the facility's safety protocols continued, another young person was about to discover that even the most innocent activities can attract the attention of nature's most efficient killers. December 29, 2014 should have been one of the best nights of Marcus Yeager's young life. The 18-year-old from Portland, Oregon, had just graduated from high school 6 months earlier and was celebrating with 4 of his closest friends on what they called their freedom trip to South Africa. The son of 2 high school teachers, Marcus had grown up in a household that valued education and careful planning. But he had inherited a rebellious streak that often worried his parents. His friends described him as fearless to a fault, someone who would try anything once, and rarely considered the potential consequences of his actions. He had been the first in their group to suggest the South Africa trip, spending months researching budget accommodations and convincing the others that they could afford the adventure if they camped instead of staying in expensive lodges. The group had been in South Africa for 10 days, spending their time exploring Cape Town, visiting townships, and gradually making their way toward the greater Kruger area. They had chosen Berg en Dal Rest Camp, one of Kruger's official camping facilities that catered to budget-conscious travelers while maintaining proper safety standards. The camp was located in the southern section of the park, known for its rocky terrain and diverse wildlife, including the leopards that use the granite outcroppings as hunting grounds and territorial markers. As the night progressed, the group had consumed several beers purchased from the camp's small shop, adding to the celebratory atmosphere of their African adventure. The alcohol had lowered their inhibitions and made them less cautious about the safety warnings they had received during their mandatory check-in briefing. Around midnight, as their campfire began to die down and his friends started discussing whether to turn in for the night, Marcus announced that he needed to use the bathroom. The camp's ablution block was located about 60 yards from their site, connected by a well-lit pathway that was considered safe for nighttime use. However, Marcus, influenced by alcohol and teenage bravado, decided that the walk to the facilities was unnecessary for what he described as a quick pee. Instead of using the designated pathway to the ablution block, Marcus wandered toward the perimeter fence that separated the camping area from the wild bush beyond. Marcus found a spot near some large rocks where the fence created a private corner, unaware that his chosen location was directly adjacent to a game trail used by various wildlife species. Leopards are among Africa's most efficient nocturnal hunters, capable of taking prey much larger than themselves through stealth, intelligence, and explosive power. The rocky terrain around Berg en Dal provided perfect hunting grounds for these solitary cats, who use elevated positions and natural camouflage to ambush unsuspecting prey. A mature male leopard, weighing approximately 140 pounds and measuring over 7 feet from nose to tail, had been following a well-established hunting route that passed directly by the camp's perimeter. These big cats are opportunistic hunters, capable of adapting their strategies based on available prey and environmental conditions. The scent of humans from the camp had initially caused the leopard to avoid the area, but the strong smell of cooking meat and food waste had drawn him closer to investigate potential scavenging opportunities. Marcus's movement to the fence line occurred at precisely the wrong moment. In the darkness, with Marcus moving alone and separated from the safety of the group, the big cat's predatory instincts were triggered. As Marcus stood at the fence relieving himself, completely unaware of the danger lurking just yards away, the leopard made its decision. The assault was over in seconds. The leopard's initial strike knocked Marcus to the ground with tremendous force, powerful claws raking across his back and shoulders as the cat's weight drove him face first into the rocky soil. His scream of shock and pain cut through the night air, alerting his friends that something was catastrophically wrong. But by the time they could react, the leopard had already begun the killing process. The cat's canine teeth, over an inch long and designed for penetrating thick-hide, punctured Marcus's neck just below the skull, severing major blood vessels and crushing his cervical vertebrae. Marcus's body convulsed as the leopard's teeth found their mark, his hands clawing desperately at the rocky ground as he tried to escape the predator's grip. But the big cat's 140 pounds of muscle and bone pinned him helplessly to the earth, and the crushing pressure on his throat made breathing impossible. His friends, alerted by the scream and the sounds of struggle, grabbed flashlights and rushed toward the fence line, calling Marcus's name and searching frantically through the darkness. What they found was a scene from their worst nightmare. Marcus's baseball cap lying in the dirt, massive amounts of blood soaking into the rocky soil, and drag marks leading away from the fence toward the dense bush beyond. The leopard, following instincts honed over millions of years, had immediately begun the process of moving its kill to a secure feeding location. The camp's emergency protocols were activated immediately, with armed rangers and park officials responding to the scene within minutes of the friends' panicked report. The search continued throughout the night and into the following day. Marcus's body was finally discovered approximately 400 yards from the attack site, cached under a rocky overhang in the classic pattern of leopard predation. The big cat had fed extensively on the soft tissue areas, following feeding behaviors that had evolved over millions of years of successful hunting in the African wilderness. The tragedy devastated Marcus's friends, who cut their trip short and returned to Oregon traumatized by what they had witnessed. Several required extensive psychological counseling to deal with the guilt and horror of their friend's death, and none of them ever traveled internationally again. His parents, destroyed by the loss of their only child, established a scholarship fund in his memory for students interested in wildlife conservation and safety education. The leopard responsible for the attack was tracked and destroyed the following day, as park policy required for any predator that had killed the human. Wildlife officials noted that the cat had been acting within normal hunting behavior when it encountered Marcus, and that the attack was entirely preventable if proper safety protocols had been followed. The incident led to enhanced security measures at Berg and Dahl, including improved lighting around the perimeter fence and stricter enforcement of curfew regulations.